Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 38, yes, 38, of Endless Conversation Loop. Today is May 2nd, 2025, and we're recording this. My name is Brandon, and I am recording here with my co-host, who's named...
Is Boom. Hello.
Greetings. Yeah, and we're here yet again to do another interesting topic, I would say. I don't have any kind of preamble this time, like other things that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about? How things are going, things are playing, stuff like that?
The only big thing right now that I've been playing is, because I'm still working on my list of games that I had started, and Ash and I are actually going through Dave the Diver right now on Switch. So this is my fourth attempt to try to actually beat the game, finally, so... But I was very thrown off guard this morning, in fact, because I was playing it, and I'm minding my own business, and then all of a sudden, there's this, cutscene that kind of showed up a little bit earlier this morning, and I didn't think anything of it, and next thing I know is I get to this one part, and I'm talking to this guy, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm playing Balatro now in Dave the Diver.
Crossover?
Yes, a crossover, legitimate crossover, which I was not aware of. I knew of some crossovers with this game, but I didn't know Balatro or Balatro, however you want to pronounce it. It's literally in Dave the Diver. I don't think it's, the full extent of the game, but it's just huh.
I'm sure it's just a very miniaturized version of the game.
It's a little bit more meatier than I would expect for, just being kind of a nod. It's literally, I haven't gotten too in-depth on it yet, because I was kind of, looking at it, and I'm like, what am I doing, Dave the Diver? I want to play Balatro, I'd play Balatro. So, it's I don't know what it all entails, if this is just kind of a side quest thing. I'm assuming it is, because I don't think this was in any of the previous times that I had played this before. So, yeah, it's kind of the thing that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around right now.
Well, you enjoy both games, so I'd say it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
I do. The only thing that sucks is I can't up the settings on it, so it kind of has a much slower pace of everything, so I'm just like, oh my god.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're used to playing the original more quickly.
Well, you can actually, up the speed up and all that.
Yeah, no, that would get annoying to me, too.
Yeah, I no pun intended, I do think this is a more watered-down version of the game, at least, which... is probably going to be oh yeah, we're, going to play maybe a few rounds of this and then call it good and kind of see where it goes from there. I also knew, Balatro had, you can actually get some of the face cards in your deck to be Dave the Diver cards. So, I knew there was, some semblance of a crossover, but I didn't realize it was working both ways when I, was kind of all of a sudden into this, and I'm like, huh.
Right, it's easier to conceive of it working the one way, but both ways is a little unexpected, I would say.
Well, and not to mention, Dave the Diver is one of those very weird cases of games where I'm kind of just surprised by the level of crossovers that they have.
Yeah, me too.
Which include, because, not only is there Balatro, and I haven't seen the rest of these yet, but I know of them at least. There is a Godzilla one, there is a Dredge one, and there is a Like a Dragon one, the Yakuza games. They're all crossed over in Dave the Diver, and I'm just flabbergasted because I don't remember ever seeing these parts of this yet, or if it's once you beat the main story kind of situation, it just kind of just huh.
Well, and some of them just seem a lot of them just seem like they don't make sense necessarily with the idea of the game, but, what do I know, right?
I think, honestly, kind of talking about this a little bit more in depth, I would actually be okay. You know what? I'm just going to give them the precursor now. I'm going to make our next topic for the next episode is going to be talking about video game crossovers, the good, the bad, the really out there. I feel like that's something that's not talked about nearly enough when it's franchises are kind of spilling into each other. There's some old school examples like Soul Calibur 2 and Legend of Zelda having Link in the game for the GameCube edition of it, that sort of stuff. But there's some odd crossovers out there. Like, I really want to kind of dig into that more for the next episode.
You heard it here, folks. We now know what episode 39 is going to be about. That's news to me as well in this moment.
Yep, you heard it here first. Boom is completely making this up as he goes and is going with it.
Breaking news.
Breaking news and breaking Brandon's brain.
Yes, I guess so. All right.
But anyway.
Yes, shall we get into the main topic of today then?
I mean, you're the one spearheading this one, so let's hear what we got.
All right. So this is kind of a weirder sort of topic to define in a sense. I wanted to discuss the subject of revisionist history in gaming. And for our purposes, like I said, it's a little bit harder to define because there's a positive way you can look at the idea of revisionist history, and there's a more negative way you can look at it. And in this case, I want to look more on that negative side, or because that's at least how I've heard the concept used more, like the term specifically. And if you want to be really technical in what I've learned through doing my very mild research, in quotes, for this topic, I learned that this would fit more with a definition called negationist history. And that idea is that basically people of today, of the present, the future from when something happened, right? They're asserting that something was the case, or in the past, even if there isn't good evidence or good reason to think that that's true. So I figure that might be a little bit of an airy-fairy kind of concept, but once we get into the examples, it'll make more sense. You know what I mean?
Sure. I guess it's one of those things, I've never really heard much on the term to begin with, so a lot of this is going to be very new to me, especially.
Right. So this is why I wanted to start with the kind of group of examples I have here, because I think it's the most clear-cut, plain Jane way of thinking of the idea. And it's the idea of saying, X, Y, or Z game was always bad, or it was always good, or it was always popular. And there's plenty of other example, other, adjectives you could put on the end of it to describe the idea. But it's essentially saying in this case, the way that we look at this now, let's say we look at, in these examples of something was always bad. People think now, just as an example, that Zelda 2 is bad. And I would tend to agree with them. I'm not a big fan of Zelda 2. I would think most people in the year 2025 are not big fans of Zelda 2. Fair?
I'd say that's a fair assumption, yeah.
But, go ahead.
I think part of it too, and this isn't strictly pointing Zelda 2 out specifics, but I feel there are certain games and certain franchises where when something kind of veers off the beaten path, and Zelda 2 is a good example of it, there's this negative connotation that it is bad. I want to make sure I'm wording this right. Zelda 2 is not your typical Zelda because it is a much more side-scrolly game than it is an actual adventure game compared to the original Zelda at the very minimum. The original Zelda had more of this openish world concept for, at the time, at least by 85 or whatever it was standards, versus Zelda 2 has a much more open world in a sense of it's a side-scrolling way. So your only real choices are to go mostly left or right versus all four directions with the original one. And I think part of the problem can kind of be in that sense is when you have two games that are the same franchise but there's a general discrepancy between how they both play, but they're still in the same umbrella of games, people are going to judge one, I think, harshly over the other. I think Assassin's Creed's kind of in the same vein where they had this kind of formulaic situation for the first 4 or 5 games or whatever it was. And then it kind of goes into more of that Odyssey style or Valhalla style of gameplay. And then for some, it didn't feel like a Assassin's Creed game anymore. I think that's always a huge, just in that, how you're saying, X was always bad, good, or popular, whatever it might be. I feel like that's such a loaded question given the time period.
Well, I think what you're pointing out here is because the thing with like Zelda 2 in particular is I'm sure we can think of examples where it's like that's just not great design or that's like too hard or whatever. But in this case, it's more like people are conflating this is too different and saying that means it's bad, you know?
Well, right, exactly. And I think that was a huge problem with Zelda 2 when it came out, in particular, because it was so different than what people loved about the original Zelda that they were kind of trying to backtrack it and kind of, I don't want to say correct it, but like that's the best word that I have in this description of like, say, Legend of Zelda Link to the Past.
But
where they did it more in that Zelda 1 style instead of Zelda 2 because they're listening to feedback. So now as someone who's like never played Zelda 2, I can't judge it on my own merits. I'm going off of mostly what other people have what other people have said, including you. If they say it's bad, I go, "Oh, okay. Does that mean that I would still give it a try at some point? Maybe." But it's not higher on the list for games that I want to play. Like, people should still play what they want to play first or what they're most interested in first.
Well, but see, that's kind of where like the distinction is here, right? Between X, Y, or Z was always bad, and it's to me that's a different idea from like this has aged poorly, or this hasn't stood the test of time, or like this has, or it's has turned out better than I thought it was in the past. Because you have to think too, like, okay, the original Zelda came out in '86. I think it would have been '86 across the board, but it could be '87 in some parts of the world. Then you have Zelda 2 in '88 or '89 for some places. But the only previous game you have to go on is the original Zelda. So there isn't necessarily an idea of like, well, this is what Zelda is. Zelda could be like Zelda 2, or it could be like Zelda 1, or it could be something totally different by the time you get to the third entry. So I think that's kind of where you get the difference of something people today saying this was always bad, when it's like, well, but on that same token, if you were someone back in the day that started with Zelda 2 and then went back and played the original, you could be experiencing the same thing, but in reverse, you know? So it's not necessarily fair to say that it was always bad. They're just different. Now, like I said, there are certainly good reasons, I would argue with both games, to say like, hey, this is a design problem, and therefore they fixed it in A Link to the Past. Like, I always go back to a Zelda 1. It's better than nothing, but having a gray brick for a map with a colored square in it showing which area you're in is not sufficient compared to having a full, complete, detailed map in A Link to the Past. Granted, they probably couldn't do that on the NES, but, it's still like a critique that I have of the game.
Right, and I think, especially with a lot of these like older examples we could probably pluck out, there are some of those that it's just like, it could be a limitations problem. Like kind of what you said with Zelda 1. It's like, it's going to look blocky. It's going to look kind of primitive, for lack of a better word.
The technology's not going to let them make a proper map.
Yeah, it's like they're going to make it with what they have available. And I think the noticeable change, just going from Zelda 1 to Link to the Past, shows that like when you get access to better technology, typically you're able to do more with it. And I would make the argument, kind of going back on what you were saying, that could have been why Zelda 2 was designed the way that it was, to be more of a side-scroller. Because people probably did complain about how, oh, this is just, kind of primitive, or this just doesn't look as good as it could. Like, yeah, it's an NES, but it's, some games are not going to look the best on there no matter what. I mean, we've seen games from, like, the Atari and stuff like that, and they do not look the best either. They're usually just like a shape on construction paper, and that's what the video game is.
Right.
But I think if I made a legitimate comparison on this, I bet Zelda 2 was being designed because I believe it was NES on that one too, right?
They were both the original NES, yes.
So let's kind of look at it from the perspective of how Nintendo is probably viewing it. If people, even back then, probably were complaining about how the game looks, to them, they probably thought, oh, let's do it kind of like a side scroller a la Castlevania. Because when you do it as a side scroller, there's more stuff to look at and it gives you more world to kind of view.
Well, and side scrollers were probably just more popular too. How many 2D games were there back in the day?
A lot. Very much a lot. I mean, even like the racing games were effectively 2D. Like if you look back to Excite Bike, that's effectively a 2D racer, and they still managed to make that work back for what they did. I think what they were trying to do is it's like you're kind of playing this creative game with the limitations that you're given. You're given a sandbox, effectively. What can you make in this general area? And for some, they can maybe make like a tower or two, like, you know, knock out a little bit of sand for a window or something like that. And there are others that can do like these really elaborate pieces with what is given to them. Does it say one is better than the other? Maybe, but like it's also that like not everyone is given the same level of experience with it too. Like if you put someone who's brand new to building sandcastles versus like a competitive sandcastle builder, which I've seen my fair share of those, like they are elaborate pieces that they can put together in a short amount of time. I am lucky if I can get a tower to get cleanly out of the bucket when I try to make one. I think that I didn't expect to actually have some sort of like sympathy for Zelda 2 in this, but like that's probably why Nintendo had to kind of play around with what they were given. It was like they tried a different version of what they wanted to do with Zelda so that, you know, more people could experience the world that it was supposed to be. Like it doesn't say that it is a perfect example of a Zelda game by any stretch, but it's like I get what they're going for at least, or at the bare minimum what I'm assuming that they were trying to go for. It's like to kind of go in more of the recent examples of Zelda. Skyward Sword. I would make that argument that nobody really genuinely was all on board with Skyward Sword when it came out for the Wii. But the more I sit there and kind of think about it, it's like, that's kind of a precursor to some elements of Breath of the Wild. And everybody loves Breath of the Wild now. And I'm not saying it from more of the open space situation thing, but like, I'm talking like the stamina meter. Everyone hated the stamina meter when it came out for Skyward Sword. And then people seemed to actually be able to at least tolerate it when Breath of the Wild came out. So, I don't know. It's so weird to see the kind of like things that can be complained about with one thing in a series, and then if it's brought back later, or even if it's slightly improved upon enough, like suddenly people kind of are okay with it in some cases.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was just like, you know, before I got on here, I was looking at some good old posts on the internet and I saw a similar kind of deal here where someone was talking about with Mario Kart World. He's like, I remember back when Mario Kart 8 came out and people were all against having Baby Rosalina. And now you don't see people complain about that anymore because they don't like now that it's like, now there's all these generic enemies are going to be characters. So like she just kind of gets left alone. So you see that thing happen in all kinds of places too.
I think the general public, and this is just in general observation, is like people are going to complain about stuff no matter what. And if like if you go anywhere, there is going to be an echo chamber of similar people that will be upset for XYZ reasons. Like, oh, we can't have Baby Rosalina. That's stupid. Because Baby Mario, Luigi, Peach, Daisy, and all them were absolutely groundbreaking character design. It's like, they did it because Baby Mario was from Yoshi's Island, and they thought, hey, let's put him in the game. It'd be fun. So they did, and everybody loved it. And they wanted to put more baby characters in. So do not be surprised if we eventually do see the eventual Baby Wario and Baby Waluigi and all these other characters too. I mean, and I think that's such a lazy argument too on the the Mario Kart World debate on like all these generic enemies are getting put in as drivers. Who cares? Like they've had some of those enemies previously. Like Wiggler was a playable driver in one of the Mario Karts. Dry Bones was another one from like Mario Kart DS.
Yep.
I think that there's just these people who just don't want to admit that it's like, you know, some of these like lesser characters are gonna like, who are they gonna fill up the roster with otherwise? It's like you don't have any new Mario characters offhand all the time. It's like no one's gonna put Cappy as a playable character for Mario Odyssey.
I mean, they could, but also to be fair, in this particular case, we are still missing some pretty clear mainstay characters. Like we're missing Diddy Kong again, and Brandon's upset about that. And we're missing Funky Kong. Like it's mostly the Kongs, but there's a couple other ones that I can think of too. But we're kind of digressing from the main topic here. So now that we've kind of talked about this particular example, is this maybe like crystallizing a little bit more for you what I mean when I say like revisionist history here?
To an extent, yes, but this is still going to be I think it's still going to be a difficult topic no matter how you slice it.
Well, absolutely. I think that's going to be the case no matter what. So I think Zelda 2 is just kind of a very clear-cut example of like, because like we talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to be in, 1990 and all you have is Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. But now we're talking about in 2025, people have those two plus like a dozen some other games that they can compare it to. Mm-hmm. So now when you're saying this game was always bad, you're not judging it based on your experience at that time. Now you're factoring in like Ocarina of Time. You're factoring in Wind Waker. You're factoring in, I don't know, Spirit Tracks, right?
There's more examples to kind of bounce off each other, just so that there's at least a healthier comparison of everything.
Right. But that doesn't mean that if you were to go back into 1990, that the way you look at it now, because you have all that baggage of all these extra games and seeing how much stuff they determined, like, that isn't how we want Zelda to be. That doesn't mean it was bad. It means they decided we want to go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. Those are very distinct, different ideas. Okay, this didn't work out for us. This isn't what we want this to be, so we're going to do something else. Mm-hmm. But you also kind of see this happening in the other way around, where people are like, oh, this was always good, even if it wasn't necessarily the case that people thought that back in the day, right? I think people have a lot of, and I have a ton of examples here. We're definitely going to just skip over a ton of the examples just for the sake of like moving along the conversation. But like I look at people right now, because they're not necessarily pleased with how the Switch experience is, they're very much romanticizing the Wii U and the 3DS era. Have you noticed that on the internet too?
No, this is the first time hearing of it.
Okay, well, I'm just saying like a good example is like, well, these systems don't have personality anymore. And on that I would agree. But we're also like kind of thinking about, well, what are you getting because you're missing that? Well, another thing people complained about on those two particular systems was it took so long to load things. The more complex that you have, your OS be, and it's like all the personality in it is great, but then you're going to get the slower load times too. Because now you're not just loading a basic white image and some icons. Now you're loading in like the 3D models and the things moving around and the music and the characters, and that puts a strain on the system. People are saying like, well, games aren't necessarily like as creative today or as new. It's like, well, but that era that you might be romanticizing also gave us Super Mario 3D World, and people look at that game today and they think it's great, and it is a pretty good game. But when it was revealed, there's a large amount of like, oh, at that game. Because in 2013, after Super Mario 3D Land, people didn't necessarily want a 3D world. They wanted more like what we got in 2017 with Mario Odyssey. And I don't want to just use Nintendo examples here, but obviously that's just like a knowledge base that I have a lot of.
No, and that's fair. I mean, there are probably other examples across the board in terms of different consoles and generations and whatnot.
Well, or like another one on here. I cannot believe there are, I mean, granted, this is just kind of how that fan base is, I suppose, but it's like there are people trying to like whitewash the legacy of Sonic 06.
People need to understand, like, that game is bad in a multitude of ways. What I will say, though, and kind of using your examples that are on the notes here, you have it listed as examples of blank was always bad as like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. And then in the same note underneath, you have blank was always good with Sonic 06 leading that. And I'm like, I would have never heard anyone probably say that. At least out of like my friends who have played those games, I don't think any Sonic fan that I am aware of would believe either of those. And what I will make the argument on is that Sonic Adventure games are not that great. Like, in terms of, like, how they were, like, functioning. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying, like, they're inherently bad games, but when you comparatively look at it between those and '06, I think there's a difference on why one is viewed less than the other. Because the adventure games feel like Sonic games still, versus '06 feels like this weird fan fiction that somebody put together. But both of them are also kind of buggy messes to some degree. Like, the adventure games have their own problems. The '06 notoriously is messed up beyond belief. But to hear people that would say, like, '06 is better than adventure games, I don't firmly believe that's the case. And the fact that you've just telling me, like, people are trying to whitewash the history of '06, I don't believe that. Because I have a hard time genuinely believing that, like, anyone could look at Sonic '06 and be like, yeah, this game is actually a lot better than we give it credit for. It's like, no, a shiny turd is still a turd, you know?
Well, and I think that's a good pseudo-ish segue, because I'm sure we're going to, like, move back into some of these examples, too, of this. But it's like, that's part of what makes this murky, right? Is that nostalgia makes people blind to maybe games being not as good as they are. Like, those people who are whitewashing Sonic '06, I would bet good money are, like, closer to my age. You know how old I was in 2006? 6 years old. So if you're someone who was born in that time and that was the game you played, like, that could, all that other stuff might be completely flying over your head because you're just nostalgic for it, right? So it's a lot easier for you as someone who is, like, attached to that game to want to whitewash it. Even if, like, maybe if you're able to take the rose-tinted goggles off, you can see, like, oh yeah, it's probably not good that during the Mach Speed section that I can just fall through the floor for no apparent reason. And another example, like, I think we've kind of touched on this already, like, well, why does it make things murky when it's like such and such was always bad? Well, new people are playing, like, they're playing these old games without adjusting their mindset, right? They're declaring this old game. Like, a lot of the things when it's like, this was always bad, they're older games. They're not so much newer games, although obviously that tends to be relative. But it's like, you're not looking at, like, another example that I put on there, right? With, like, the new Super Mario Brothers games. People don't really care for those anymore, and I don't blame them. But we also have to acknowledge the original DS game is, like, one of the best-selling games of all time. And it was beloved at the time because it was the first, like, new, like, one of the first newer 2D games to come out after a long period of having very few of them. And it's okay. It's okay if you don't like it now, but it's not, you can't say it was always bad. It's just, like, it hasn't stood the test of time for you.
I'm going to be very angry at that statement because I take full offense on that one, because I think the new Super Mario Brothers games are actually really good still, and probably hold up better than some of the previous entries even. I think the problem is that, like, we have been kind of spoiled, I think, for lack of a better word, for a lot of these newer titles and, like, how they have all these things. Like, obviously, if you're going to compare something like Super Mario Brothers Wonder to, like, new Super Mario Bros., like the original one for the DS, there is many more bells and whistles in Wonder than there is in the OG one. But I think those, like, new Super Mario Bros., like the original ones when they came out, like the DS, and even the second one, I think that was on the 3DS, like those ones, I think are more designed for the older generation, like, that grew up with those types of Mario Brothers games. Whereas Wonder was, like, trying to introduce them to 2D Mario, after probably a lot of them had their first Mario experience be Odyssey.
I think it's probably some of both. I think, you know, part of the idea with Wonder, I mean, because it was one of the things that inspired that was the reaction with games like Super Mario Maker, with people saying, oh, we're never going to need another 2D Mario game. I have an infinite amount of levels right here, right? So
until the servers go down, though.
Well, yes, exactly. But also, like, I'm just saying, the idea is, okay, well, there's so much more we can do with this. to an extent, I think you're right. Like with the new Super Mario Brothers, they clearly introduced a lot of stuff. They introduced a lot of the 3D type moves into a 2D game. You got your double jump, you got your triple jump,
You got your wall jump.
You got your wall jump, exactly, right? And those are new things for that. But when you look at the levels themselves and you compare them to like the classic games, they're relatively similar. They're kind of like boilerplate in that kind of sense. It's like they all kind of flow together. And I think they're just more a victim of like they did 4 games in relatively short amount of time in a 6-year period. So that's a big part of why it's like you have 4 very similar looking games, 4 games with very like similar level designs across such a short amount of time. So that's kind of why people would say like, well, this is always bad, when it's really no, you were just fatigued by the time you got to the end.
I think there's a much more specific phrase we could probably use is I think it's just power crept. Like, I know we've talked about this a little bit. Like, you're not big with card games, but you know what power creep is, like, in terms of card games?
Well, why don't you define it here anyway, because the audience might not know it.
Okay, so playing Magic the Gathering, I have seen plenty of cards over the years, in like 15, 16 years of playing. Power creep is a phrase that we like to use a lot of the time, where it's talking about a card based off of a similar card that existed prior, but it is added to it so that it becomes better. A great example of that is pacifism. It's a white carded magic that's 1 white mana and 1 colorless mana. It's an enchantment that you put on a creature, and then it just says target creature cannot attack or block. Now, if that card gets power crept, what they might end up doing is they might keep it at the base level to start off with, and then they decide, oh, why don't we add something to this? Like, and still kind of keeps the same thing, but then there's like that little extra thing to it. Like, say, oh, like if you want to destroy it, if you're the creature's owner, you have to pay an additional like 3 mana or something in order to get rid of the, like, whatever. Or it might say it has an ability that means it costs more to target this, or something to that degree. Power creep basically takes these like much more basic cards that like a lot of players who were really into Magic, like when it was first kind of like even the first like maybe 10 years or so, and then they start increasing it in better and better increments, that those older versions of the cards no longer need an existence because they don't have a reason to at that point. Like, another example, this is probably a better example for me personally, is there's a card called Tormenting Voices, which is a sorcery speed, which means you can only play it on your turn, and it's like 2 mana total, and you have to discard a card to draw 2 cards, which is not bad. But then they did Thrill of Possibility, which is the same thing, except now you can play it at any point, including your opponent's turn. And then they even went further and made that better. Like, I forget what the exact card is, but there are other versions of the cards where, like, even that one is now better. So I feel like, kind of going back to the Mario examples, like, the power creep in this case would be take, like, the original Super Mario Brothers and how it was basically like this. And I'm strictly talking 2D Zelda, or 2D Marios in this case, for the sake of example. They did not have, like, a huge amount of those between, like, you know, quick succession. But, like, compare it to, like, the OG one to Super Mario Brothers 3. Then compare that to Super Mario World. Then compare that to New Super Mario Bros., for example. There is an evolution to it where it's the same idea, but more things getting added and added and added, to the point of we're at Super Mario Wonder now, where it has more bells and whistles. It's got a lot more things going on. It's a lot more engaging than I think any previous 2D Mario would be. And I think that's because they probably designed Wonder knowing that, like, it's going to be harder to sell a 2D Mario in that sense when people have played Odyssey and they know that that's a really good game. And then the second game is going to be a little bit slower paced by comparison. So they had to find a way to power creep and reinvent that format. And Wonder ended up being a really popular title for the Switch. So Nintendo knew what they were doing when it came to all that front, and I don't think it's fair to compare like some of those older 2D Marios and kind of view it in the sense of like, oh, well, New Super Mario Brothers is bad. And maybe this is just the boomer in me talking, I don't know. But I think it's unfair to kind of look at like the New Super Mario Brothers games and say like they don't add anything when they add plenty. It's they don't add enough staying power, I think was the problem compared to like a Super Mario Brothers World or even the original Super Mario Brothers.
I think the big thing with these that we're kind of arriving on is like it's about having that thing that makes it special in a way. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what makes Mario 1 special? It's the first one. Mm-hmm. What makes Mario 3 special? It's got all these weird power-ups, and it's the first one with a world map. What makes Mario World special? It's the first one with Yoshi, right?
Well,
and now the world map
Yoshi,
interconnects.
Yeah, and there's like the Cave Flower, there's the whole Star Road. Like, there's a lot of things in World that I think gave it its staying power, but this is beside the point here.
Right, yeah, we've definitely, again, gotten into, like, more like the nitty-gritty on some of the particular games themselves here.
Back in my day.
Right. So that's a lot of what I've seen happens in this particular kind of context is people will be like, this was always this, when really what they're saying is, I don't like this as much anymore, or, you know, it doesn't tend to be so much that it's like making a straight up factual error. It's like just trying to transpose the present onto the past in terms of like how you look at something. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, there definitely is a little bit of like straight up factual anachronism, and that's why I put on like something was always popular or unpopular. Mm-hmm. Like I saw someone recently talking about like, you know, people like really pump up banjo as like having been this huge thing. And it's like, well, when you compare the amount of N64s sold versus the amount of original PlayStation sold, and therefore the number of copies of PlayStation competitors like Croc, that was another one I brought up there, which is very like timely considering it just had its remake re-released, or be released rather, and it's like there were so many more copies of that sold, so therefore by that logic, Croc should be more popular. So saying the banjo was more popular within that was kind of a misnomer, but at the same time when I think about it, it's like, well, you could make the argument then, too, that it's like, because so many copies of that were sold, maybe it didn't end up, ironically, having the same staying power because it was just like, oh, that was the game you got for the PlayStation if you wanted a 3D platformer, mm-hmm. right? So that's how it's changed into like, well, people kind of forgot about it because it wasn't necessarily that you had a ton of, you know, hardcore gamers picking it up. It was that you had everybody pick it up, and when you have everybody do this, that's when you get into like 10, 15 years later, people are like, well, what do I need this PlayStation sitting around anymore in these games? Well, I'm just going to get rid of it, you know? That doesn't mean Croc is bad, or that like original PlayStation games are bad. I just think there's perhaps a greater likelihood because it had such a wider adoption that, you know, when you look at the popularity, you have to differentiate. And again, it's another example of things being murky. Yes, it was popular in terms of like more people played it. But is it more popular in the zeitgeist now? And that's a different question. Is it popular among the game playing people? Maybe that's a way of looking at it.
Well, and something that I think that's interesting is it's like certain examples of this, I feel like, are probably, it's a twofold thing. Something could be popular at the time, and then it kind of falls off because maybe people don't talk about it. Best examples you have kind of listed here is probably Klonoa and Croc. And then there's other examples that it's the opposite, where it's like maybe they weren't as popular games for XYZ reasons, but then they become bigger names, like almost because of like how people have kind of talked about them over time. And like you kind of list like Banjo-Kazooie and Earthbound, I think are two really good examples of that. Like, yes, Banjo-Kazooie is popular, but like it has not had a game in this decade as far as I'm aware. Like, probably
It didn't have a game in the 2010s either.
no. When did Nuts and Bolts come out? Like, I know that's not like
2008.
oh my god, I'm old.
We are old.
Don't lump yourself in with me. I'm old. There's
Whoa,
a
whoa,
massive
whoa.
difference here.
I'll be a quarter of a century old this summer.
I'll be 34 in like a month as of recording. Shush. Silence, youth. But I think that's something that it's like there's this weird kind of disconnect sometimes, and I like to call this, and this might be another topic for a different day, the YouTubeification of gaming popularity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think we'll need to flesh that out more, but like even just in the term, it's like I can envision a topic of some kind coming out of that.
Let me kind of give a brief rundown of what I mean. Is when gaming content became huge, and I'm talking like probably like the 2010s is when it really started to pick up, and it still has like a pretty solid footing to this day. Like, how many YouTubers still have like their primary thing is the gaming channel, or there are other people who just they do a gaming channel on the side, maybe because they want to share their stuff. I mean, hell, we could even consider doing one if we really felt like it, like once this kind of gets more flushed out. But like they're like Cinnamon Toast Ken, I'm pretty sure started with gaming content, started going to a different type of content, and then made a gaming channel for his gaming content. Like, the YouTubeification of how gaming has kind of progressed, I think also kind of implies into a lot of what we're talking about today. Like, when a YouTuber does like this long form essay essentially of a game that maybe people kind of know, like your Earthbounds or your Ghost Tricks or stuff like that, and then they're praising it, if they have enough of an audience, it becomes in demand because, oh, this guy that I watch or this girl that I watch, she or he said that it's really good, so I should go get it for myself so I can experience it. And then it raises the demand, which is part of the reason why the retro game market, I feel like, really exploded in a way. When you start seeing games that, probably like initially, like prior to all of this, were probably depreciating in value overall, like it wasn't really being thought of, and now certain games can be upwards of hundreds of dollars now, all because, maybe a few YouTubers all had this consensus of like, yeah, this is a really good game, you should definitely pick up at some point. That the demand became so high. Like, it's why the Fire Emblems for GameCube and Wii are so expensive, because they specifically both are not like the most easy to find games in America, but then like people started praising them religiously, and it was like, oh yeah, if you have this or if you find this, you should definitely pick it up. And what probably would have been like a $40 game used is now pushing like $90 to $100 at some game stores.
It's a hidden gem.
And that word, like that phrase in itself, is like probably another reason for that too. Like saying a game that's like a hidden gem, where it's like, and I feel like there's two ways of saying it. There's the one where it's like it's a great game, but it didn't sell a lot, so a lot of people don't know about it, or maybe it didn't sell popular enough to really warrant a lot of advertising toward it. Like the Fire Emblem games, for example, they were not the most popular games in the system. They're absolutely up there in the higher echelon of, GameCube and Wii games, I would argue. And then on the flip side is maybe there's a game that's like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 that maybe it had some okay sales, but like people kind of like threw it to the wayside until someone said, hey, do you remember this game? And everyone's like, oh yeah, I played that game when I was a kid. So like hidden gem is really kind of taken a weird turn of a phrase in today culture, I feel like.
You're right, and I feel like in that same kind of sense, your Fire Emblem examples hit more of this was a really good game, but it just wasn't a popular genre, so people didn't play it.
Right.
Whereas like Croc is a great example of like, it's a pretty good game, but a lot of people played it and they just weren't thinking about it, and then someone thought about it and decided, I want to make a video on it, and it happened to blow up, and then it became popular again. Doesn't mean it's a bad game, but it's like generally it was considered like a good game, 7 to 8 out of 10, like just a thumbs up kind of game, as opposed to being like this revolutionary hidden gem.
Right, and if you want to even go a little further, there's kind of a third class of hidden gem, like the so bad it's good type, like your
Yep.
deadly premonition. That's probably the best example I can think of. If you look at it and break it down in its parts, Deadly Premonition is not that good of a game, but it has this cult following because just everything about it has this weird charm to it that it got a solid audience. Despite the fact, I mean, it would not have gotten a re-release on the Switch if people didn't want it. So it's such a weird phrase how hidden gem can kind of mean all these different things, and it kind of still ties back into what we were initially talking about, is like, you know, this was always good, this is always bad, this was always popular, this was always unpopular. And it really kind of, we almost kind of found like a same topic that was like kind of running parallel with this whole thing.
Right. Well, I think that's the same kind of thing with the hidden gem idea. Very, also, coincidentally, crystallizes it well, because it's like, if you were to look at the discourse around a game like Earthbound today, and this isn't to say it's a bad game, but like, it did not sell a ton of copies. It was consistently on sale because people didn't play RPGs, because it wasn't doing like, oh, the pre-rendered thing that people wanted in the 90s. But the way that like the people who really like the game talk about it, and the amount of like conversation you'll see about it, you would think that it was this definite classic of the day. And it's still like a pretty damn good game, but that's just, if you went back 30 years ago, that's just not what you'd see. That's not the reality of what it was. It's changed over time. And that's fine. But, you know, we have to look at what really happened, not what we think it should have been.
Well, and I think that's something else that kind of ties in with a lot of it, is like, you know, if you kind of put together like a top 10 list personally of like, you know, the best all-time SNES games or NES games, like, certain games definitely will still be there from like how it was at the start to today. Like, if you're talking strictly NES, the original Mario Brothers is probably going to be on that list even today if you look back. But like something like an Earthbound probably wasn't going to be a top 10 game when it first was coming out during the SNES era. But then if you look at like all these lists that are out there, a lot of people put Earthbound high on that list because they know and they got a chance to actually play a game that was realistically a very well thought out, put together. It was just kind of advanced for the time that maybe it was in the wrong era of what people were looking for at the time. And now people kind of like started to dust this off and find it as like this important relic of that generation now. And like people are constantly doing that over all the systems, all the generations. And it's so fun to see people coming out of the woodwork with like a game that, you know, maybe I never heard of, but they played it religiously since they were 6.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing that I think comes with this too is that, like, when I was reading some of the stuff about this, like in this particular area, there is definitely an extent to which some people start thinking like, well, people say this thing, like they talk about this thing like it was always this way, and therefore they're like, it's like they become soured to the example. And I think it's fair for some of these, but like to the extent that I think it's fair, it's more when people like pretend something was like always good, you know? Like with saying something was always unpopular or like was always popular, well, sure, that's people more transposing today onto the past, but it's really more that they're just giving it an inaccurate start point. The reality is like, okay, maybe in 1995 when it came out, Earthbound wasn't popular, but then you hit 2008 or 9 and people are learning about it, and then the popularity increases from there. So it's like it was always popular, just starting at this different point. It just wasn't always, in a very literal sense, popular. So I think we've covered that one pretty well. Again, is this becoming a little bit clearer for you now? Like in general, I think it's still kind of a foggy topic no matter what, but it's maybe a little bit clear what I mean when I say this is revising how things were.
Sure.
Well, let's move on to our next example, and this one ironically, because of news that came out today, I've got to come to a maybe different perspective than I started this with, which is the idea that like gaming is more or less expensive than it was now. I mean, the reality is no matter what, there is gray to this conversation, and for this conversation as well, I think we should just entirely sidestep the topic of like games should be more or less expensive. Like, I think that's an entirely separate discussion that like then you start getting into like, well, this is how development should be done, and this like we should have seasons passes or we shouldn't have them, and like we should have DLC, we shouldn't. Like, there's a lot more than that. I want to be more strictly focused on when you look at the numbers, would it be accurate to say gaming is more or less expensive today? So I think that's a good boundary to set for this, right?
Right, and I think the other thing is, like, I don't have the time or the tequila to go into all the specifics of, like, numbers and all that sort of stuff, but, like, from an in general perspective, I think it's a very interesting of a viewpoint on both sides, because it's like, it both is and it isn't, from my point of view.
Absolutely, and that's a key thing for the audience to remember with this, too, is it's like, we're not experts, we're not economists, we're not, financial planners or whatever. I'm just looking at some numbers and doing some like, back of the napkin kind of math here to get some reasons for why it's like, okay, this is more expensive or this is less expensive, or when you crunch the numbers, it's relatively similar, right? So on the whole, consoles and games, like they sold for similar prices to today's games or a little bit more when adjusted for inflation. And I brought this up last time with the example of Killer Instinct, right? You see this in like, you just look up some random weekly ad and it's like, oh, this system was this much this time. Let me go to the old CPI calculator, put in this price during this year and this month compared to today. Calculate and it'll give you, this is what it is. It does the multiplication. Of course, the problem with that is those are just single snapshots in time. And one of the realities with this is like, again, just because it's something that I know and I love, we're going to keep staying on this Super Nintendo train. I did not plan on this being a very heavily Super Nintendo episode, but, it's just kind of how this worked out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When it launched in August of 91, it launched at $200. And so if you go to the CPI calculator, that's about $470 today. A little bit more than the Switch 2 launching in a month from now. But you can find ads. I found one on, there's a lot of reasons not to use this website on Fandom, but they have the video game sales wiki is one of them on there. And so like what they have is like charts with like, okay, here we've found sources, we've found like ads like showing here's how much the Super Nintendo was selling for at this particular moment in time. And so like you could see ads where it's like, okay, by May of 92, less than a year later, they shaved $50 off of it. There's $150 in May 92, so that's about $350 today. What happens now that this system has dropped in price? Oh, and what get even better, now we get to holiday of 92 a few months later. We chop another $50 off. Now it's $100 in like November, December of 1992, which is about $225 today. The result? The amount of people who would have paid the $470 equivalent of today is so proportionately smaller that, like, in reality, yeah, when we talk about this, it's probably more accurate to think about it about systems in that $350, $225 range, because that's when more people would have picked them up. It was something where I was thinking when I was reading, I was like, oh, well, now I have to start concluding then with systems in particular, it looks like those have become more expensive. It's a hard conclusion not to draw when you see, like, in the in the modern day, right? We just haven't gotten a permanent price. We never got a permanent price drop on the Switch. We never have had a permanent price drop on the PS5. And newly announced today, the price of, last night actually, but still pretty much brand new, the price of Xboxes is going to be going up. Up, not down. The Series X, the regular schmegular Series X, has been $499. It will now be $599. So we are going in the opposite direction now than it used to be in the past. Now, that isn't to say, like, you know, there are some, like, contextual reasons for maybe, like, why aren't you seeing this happen today? Okay, people, when they think of the console war, for example, in the 90s, they think about the kids on the playground talking about it, but there was a very real business angle to it too, right? If you're Nintendo, you're Sega, and you want to beat each other at this business, you want to be the top dog, because they're actually competing here, then you've got a better incentive to drop the price, right? You just want people to buy your console.
Right.
We just don't have that today, right? Console makers, they don't have an incentive to do that as well. I also, have you, I have it linked here. I don't know if you want to take a look at that chart that I have or that I have linked in there, but I think it's got, if you'll notice some interesting kind of patterns with it. Like, you'll notice the further back you go, the longer these charts tend to become, and they tend to have more price drops. And they get smaller over time too, but the further you go into the future, like you compare the, you compare the PS2 starting at $299 in 2000 and then dropping to, $130 by 2006 at like its tail end. And then you go to, say, the PS4 and it starts at $399 in 2013. And then a few years later, the lowest you see is for the PS4 Slim at $299. That's another change too.
I just went down all the way for PlayStation 1 and see how it went from $95 at $300 to May of 2002 being about $50.
Now, to be fair, though, on that, I don't know that that's the best. Like, the way that, I mean, it's true. Like, that's literally what happened. But, like, I would think you'd almost want to stop looking at the chart at that August 99 example because by the time you hit May 2002, the PS2 is already out.
I think it's because it's like something like that is more, I think, with the secondhand market rather than the first-hand market when they're all coming out and all this stuff. But yeah, I definitely see your point of a lot of these where I'm kind of just like, it's insane to kind of see some of these that still are much more expensive, I feel like, now. And I'm like...
Well, yeah. I'm just thinking of it like you look at, okay, how many people bought the PS1 at $300.95 compared to how many more bought it in March of 97 here at $150, at half the price.
Mm-hmm. Which probably...
It's hard to come to... Continue.
I was going to say,
talking a lot.
Which probably does contribute in the console wars than more people realize, is that when you have a system that once it starts to go down, I mean, weren't we talking about this, or maybe I was talking to somebody else about this, about the price drop on the 3DS. People weren't buying it at the price that they put it in. They dropped it like, what was it, $70? And then it started
we talked about this last time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I feel like something that, like, when it comes to this whole debate of, gaming is more or less expensive now, it's because they're not willing as much to sell a finished product in a lot of the time. Like, if I look on Steam right now and look up certain games, like, there are games that are still in early access, they have DLC, they have all these things about whatever, and what's the last game that you can legitimately think that you bought that was complete? And I don't mean like, it came out with like an art book or something. I mean like you only paid for it once and that was the end and you didn't have to buy it ever again. Because for me, I think the last time is Balatro.
Now, see, for me, it's a tough example because I think a lot of these types of games that I tend to buy do fall a little bit more in that camp, but if I look at my shelf to my left, man, I should have turned the lights on in here, but I'm not being filmed right now, so I didn't think I would need any light on. Um, Man, I want to pick a good like third party example too. That's not so that it's like a little bit more accurate. Like I'm looking at here, one of the ones I bought over Black Friday season, I bought Crash Bandicoot 4. That's a rare example of a game where it's like it was done and it maybe had like an update or two.
Well, right, but
Like
I'm not counting updates. I'm counting like if there was something else that they had to sell you to buy.
Nope, nothing like that. Another one I'm looking at here. I've got the Dragon Quest III HD. The closest thing it had to like DLC, quote unquote, was like this pre-order bonus of like giving you a couple extra items in your inventory, but like they're consumables, so I don't know that I'd really count that necessarily. It's not like exclusive stuff. Yeah, well, see, but I feel like that maybe is getting into a slightly different topic, which is the games. And I think when you look at just the games compared to the systems, I think games have gotten cheaper, but they've become more expensive as a result because of all the DLC and the season passes and the loot boxes and all the ways that you can just nickel and dime yourself into paying more money for something, right? Into paying more for the game.
And that's
what it's like the games. Oh, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is because like when it came to certain games back when they were being released, like probably I would argue probably for the most part through like the PS3, Xbox 360 era, and probably the GameCube era in there. A lot of these games came already pre-packaged. Like this is the final product. We're not adding anything into it. Blah 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 blah. And then we would make sure like if there is stuff to put in the games, you would put them with, you know, things that you can unlock or customizables that can be unlocked, that sort of thing. It didn't happen necessarily until what a lot of people argue is, I think it's Oblivion, the horse armor, was like the first DLC. And because of that, people were going to somehow pay like $2 or whatever for horse armor. And that was it. That was the whole thing. But it was the first step in what we've kind of accepted as the norm in the business model now for games. Because, like, now games have, like, oh, well, we're adding DLC, and you can pay for it for, like, $5 or whatever it is. And I'm all for supporting studios, and, like, sometimes, like, it's different in the case, I feel like, for a game who was, like, oh, yeah, this is the final game, but then maybe they had some DLC that they decided that they wanted to do, and they wanted to put it in there. Like, is it necessary? Maybe not. Like, I think Dredge is a good example of that, where you don't have to buy the DLC. You can play the game as it is, and that's the full experience. But then it's like, the DLC makes it become from like 100% to like 105, 110% then. So I think it's so weird how, like, a lot of people, it's like, oh, gaming is more expensive because they look more at the numbers. And I'm like, yeah, but if you look at the models of today, like, it probably either evens out, if not gets higher. Like, look at certain games that are, like, live service games, like your League of Legends, your Valorants, your Overwatch 2s, like, all these things where you can put real money in to get more stuff out of it, despite the fact that maybe you don't actually need to spend that much money. And Marvel Rivals is like another recent example. It's like, yeah, Marvel Rivals is free to play, and you can get some stuff unlocked for free if you play the game and all this other jazz. But there's also like the Battle Pass system where it's like, hey, we have more exclusive content behind this paywall if you want to pay $5-10 or whatever it is. And people do that. I myself have done that, and I get it. And like, I think Rivals is, at least by comparison, like one of the better examples of the, you know, paying DLC, because it's not stuff that really adds to the game. It's just, oh, I really like this skin, or oh, I like this emote, or that sort of thing. So kind of looking at it from the perspective of like living in the modern society of gaming, where everyone is like, how do we milk this game for as much as humanly possible so people keep playing it for not only weeks but months, for years, and being able to find any semblance of way to make money out of this game. And some find really good success in it, like League of Legends has probably been one of the biggest examples because they've been doing that for over a decade now. it's the same game for the last 13 years, but they at least update the game to some capacity that makes the seasons at least semi-feel different, adding constant new skins, putting in new game modes, this sort of thing. And then you even got other games that just don't do it well enough. Like Marvel Avengers was a big example of that, where it just flopped. Because it was like, people wanted that not to be a live service game, and, that wasn't what we got. Kill the Justice League, another example of that, where it's like, that should have been a single player or like a 4-player story game, not a live service Borderlands ripoff, basically.
Well, and I think another elephant in the room we're kind of missing here that, in a sense, I probably should have mentioned it in my notes, but I didn't think about like getting on this too, is like, where is the influence of mobile in here? Because a lot of that kind of model started with mobile games, and then it was like, oh, this is doing pretty good here. What if we try introducing this onto PC games and console games? Then people for a long time were like, no, we don't want to do this, and yet then you get your whales.
Mobile
right?
games.
Then you get people adopting it.
Mobile games definitely hit that point early on, because that was something I think even during like the Angry Birds era, where you pay money and you get stuff because people got addicted. But the difference with it was mobile games are designed to be addicting, and I think that's how they got the financing side of it figured out pretty early too, was like, because they know these games are addicting. Your Fruit Ninjas, your Angry Birds, your Temple Runs, like all these older games, and like as the games got more intricate, or they were stuff that would require daily attention, you can limit them to a certain point, but then you're just like, oh yeah, but what if you paid us $5 and we can keep doing this even longer? And like, it boggles my mind how they were so quick to get that whole thing figured out, and now modern gaming systems, modern gaming companies are taking notes and trying to implement it into their current strategy. It used to be essentially an apples and oranges thing, but now we're in the whole fruit basket together with that whole front.
Yeah. It's kind of this fusing of markets together, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah, if it weren't, I was definitely like leaning more already, like in the case of consoles, to say like, I think it's fair to say the hardware's gone up in price. In particular with this new Xbox news, I'm definitely even more solidly in that camp, and that it's like the initial barrier to entry has definitely gone up, but it's like the games are just harder to equate because they're so different today, because you just couldn't have those models back in the day. Mm-hmm. I mean, you kind of, like, you had it a little bit with PC games with some expansions, but that's like about the extent that there was with it in terms of add-on stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's also something to be said for like cartridges cost less than discs. You can see ads back in the day from like 97, 98, where it's like one page is the N64 games, and then the next page is the PlayStation games. It's like the PlayStation games are so much cheaper because they're on a disc. Then you have to think about like, oh, well, maybe those games that were more expensive that were on cartridges, some of them could have had like different weird chips that aren't in today. So how do you factor that in compared to a modern type game? And then the other thing when it comes to factoring in, what about all the ways you can get used games or get games just for cheaper than their retail price? Mm-hmm. Because plenty of that still exists today. Okay, used shops, well, those have always been a thing. It's not a good argument to say like, well, games are more expensive now because we could get them at used game shops. Yeah, newsflash, you can do that today.
Right, but I think the thing that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration when they argue this is more expensive or it's more cheaper. Like, look at stuff like, say, the Switch, right? Mm-hmm. The Switch has an online library of previous games that they have. And, like, yes, it's an emulator by probable definition on this. But at the end of the day, look at it from the perspective of for $20 and the initial purchase of the console, you get access to the entirety of those libraries. And even if you don't pay the $20...
Well, you don't get the entire libraries. You get the games that they've curated for it. But, like, you get 100+ games.
Let me rephrase it. You get a lot of the old school, like, big hits from probably at the time. Not the full library, obviously. I didn't mean to make it sound like that. but you're getting like a lot of these really well-known titles to start off getting into like the older generations of games. And that's if you like, if you don't pay the $20 for like the online, for example, you still get the NES, you still get the SNES, you still get the Game Boy. That is 3 generations worth. That is like probably a good 150 games there-ish, I would argue. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know the specifics on how many are on what ones. But then like you add in another $20, well now you get access to the Game Boy Advance, you get access to the N64, the TurboGrafx, the Genesis. Like, for the low bar of that is like if you get past the initial console price, you technically don't even have to buy a Switch game, and you can still have access to all the old stuff that they have available on there. And it becomes like you have all of this now. If like straight up, if you were like an older generation and you wanted to play some of those older games, and if you just do like a 5-minute research and be like, okay, what is available on the Switch online for me, you buy that and don't even sink in $20 for the online plan. If you want to just play NES and SNES and Game Boy, just that bar of the system, and you're set. That's it.
Well, you need to pay the $20 if you're doing the year-long plan, and that gets you the NES, Game Boy, and SNES. So, like, either way, like let's say in this case, what you're saying is like
I thought those were available for free without the online plan.
No, it's $20 for those. It's $50 gets you the N64 and the Genesis and the GBA stuff too. But either way, your point still kind of stands. Like, $20 compared to a full price game is a much lower barrier to entry, and you are getting a lot more games. You are also like, you're right. You're getting a lot of the heavy hitters. You're not getting all the heavy hitters though. Mm-hmm. You're getting plenty of games where it's like people just don't remember these. Like who back in the 90s played Brawl Brothers?
Fair.
I've not heard of a single person who did that, right? But
that could have been a game that was popular at the time. That might be why they did it, or maybe it was just easy for them to get it.
No, I think it's more the latter. But I mean, what you're trying to say is like the console, the hardware, yes, is a high barrier to entry, but that could be a good example of like you're getting 100-some games for $20
versus. Right? For 3 times the price, here's one AAA first-party game.
Well, yeah, and you know what? You're right. I should have put this on the list too when it comes to like how do you factor stuff in. Independent games too.
Math, baby.
Indie games are so cheap, and they're usually done. It's like one and done, and that's it. They don't often, or at least not all of them, have a ton of DLC. So. But yeah, if you're just talking about the AAA market for sure, then I think it's a lot fairer to say games are probably more expensive, but like there's just so much here that's hard to really come with a more accurate answer of like it's more expensive or it's less expensive.
Yeah, it's a very hard argument to go one way or the other because the examples even we provided, it's so all over the board because like you can say it for this one thing, you can say it for this thing, that thing, the other thing, and you could end up just essentially like kind of going in circles on the numbers of it all, that it kind of just probably evens out in some case. I'm not saying if it does or doesn't, I'm more just kind of saying it from the perspective of like, okay, here's basically why this is like, and it really comes down to the person's perspective too, is like, what do I want to get out of this system, or what do I want to get out of these games? I don't know anybody who bought a Switch thinking, oh, I can finally play the NES games that I've been wanting to since I was a kid,
Right.
Like, that is more of like a thing you get in addition to what you were initially getting the Switch for, which was maybe Mario Kart or Smash Bros. Or Mario Party or whatever it might be. And like I think the biggest thing is that like on some level, companies are trying to help out where they can to some degree when it comes to the cost effectiveness of everything. Why, like, if you go on like the eShop for the Switch, there is these sales going on, and it goes from like anywhere between like 10% to like 90% off. but you're getting a digital copy. If you don't care about having a physical game, that is an amazing way to save money at the end of the day. Because you can get, like, say, a $60 game, and even if it's 50% off, you got it for, $30. Yes, it's going to not be in your hands physically, but you'll still get to experience the game instead of just sitting there and being like, man, I really wish I could play this game, but I have to wait for this sale, or waiting for it to show up in a secondhand store, whether it's, a retro store or a Goodwill or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and that's another thing with this too, that like I keep coming back to, even going back a month, like funnily enough, exactly a month ago, apparently, to April 2nd, is like, I just don't understand why people seem to be pretending like games don't go on sale, or as if a sale doesn't count unless it's some astronomically high percentage off. Like, I mean, granted, I get that in the sense that it's like, there are definitely plenty of times where I've looked at like, oh, that game is a third of the price off. Nah, I'd like to get it for less than that. But then I just keep waiting. Because, like, sure, a sale where it is 50% off will come sooner than I think. But a sale where it's 70-some% off, I don't think that's realistically happening. And if it does, that's also a major piece of contributing to some of that bit that I said we'd steer clear the boundaries of, which is, like, because that game is so cheap, that's when you start getting into the season passes and DLC, because then they need to make up the money that they took off of that from that giant sale. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I think neither side of the like games are more expensive or games are cheaper. The only one that I think is like really accurate is probably just on the distinction of hardware, because you're talking about only like the 3 systems. But then when you start throwing in PC, then that also gets a little bit more complicated too. Mm-hmm. Because sure, PCs may still be 4 figures today. There were a lot more like $3,000 plus computers back in the day though. Whereas like, you don't see that today. You can get a perfectly competent machine for like $750, which is still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but
comparatively, look at it, like, going back to your Xbox example today, like, that's $600 now. So for $150
True.
more, I can get a competent computer? Say less. Like,
and you don't have to pay for any online stuff. That's all just there. Like, you can just go on the internet and play your game. Like,
and some more multifaceted machine. I think that's part of the reason why some of the systems that I own, I actually kind of am okay with that I own. Because, like, it's not just a console in some cases. Like, the PS4, that is a Blu-ray machine for me, too. Like, I can watch my movies on there. I legitimately think that, like, part of why the consoles, in particular, have become kind of this thing where it is all these different facets are attached to it. We can watch YouTube, or we can get internet access, or whatever it might be, is because they want to give you not just, hey, this plays games. They want to be like, oh, this also plays your music. Oh, this also plays your movies. Oh, you can also, do X, Y, Z things. Oh, we have, apps that you can use through it so you can watch sports or something like that, which is a case for this thing that I found out recently, because a buddy of mine has a PS4 and he's been watching MLB games through that. So there are a lot of things that these consoles nowadays can do. Whether people know about it or not is different, but a lot of people look at it just at this example of this is a thing that plays games. It's not a multifaceted piece of equipment that actually has more uses than just playing games.
But I think there's also the fair counterpoint of like, but some of those extra things, since 99% of TVs nowadays, it seems like, are smart TVs, it's like, well, I can just have the TV and not have to bother with any of that extra stuff. Or maybe you buy a cheap Roku and that's what you get. So, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but,
Oh, yeah, and we could talk until we're blue in the face on this. We practically are at this point.
Yes, no. It's all complicated. There's no one right answer. There's no one wrong answer. But yeah, it's hard to say, like... It's hard to say, like, when you're revising this history... If you want to make the argument that like games were more expensive back then, we can bring up plenty of reasons why it's still just as much or worse now. But you could also say the total opposite for like, oh, it was cheaper back then. And it's like, well, but these prices were still true. And, you know, you still did have people buy these at this price, even if they definitely were more likely to buy them at lower prices. Like, at the end of the day, it's all complicated. One of my favorite words that I come back to all the time. Now, I did write another kind of bigger, potentially umbrella topic on here, but I think since we're approaching the 90-minute mark, I think I want to kind of cut it off there. This could be another topic where it's like, I think, you know, if we keep thinking about it, we can find maybe some more things that fit into this dynamic. And, you know, there's certainly nothing bad with revisiting topics. In fact, on our previous episode, we did get a comment from a user who is like, I would love to see more of this. So certainly nothing wrong with us revisiting topics if we have more angles or new things to add to it.
Even better.
Yeah. Is there anything with this that, like, these first couple topics that, like, now you've thought about that we haven't, like, touched on yet today?
I feel like that I just realized how much more passionate about these topics than I realized I was going to be.
Well, see, and that's interesting because you went into this too thinking like, I don't really know what this means, and that's kind of why I kept trying to do these little like check-ins throughout. Like, even now, I would think it's probably the most clear it's been so far. Even if on the whole, it's still like a topic where there's a lot of gray and a lot of like unclear like ways to distinguish historical revisionism from like just a change in opinion.
So I don't know, are we wrapping this episode here then, and we'll put a pin in this for the next chance that we get? Or
yeah, I think we can put a pin in my last like major example, because if anything, that also just puts me ahead on the next time that I'm like, I want to talk about historical revisionism again. I have a whole sub-example already written up, you know?
Yeah, we get to revisit the revisionist history.
Yes, we get to review the revisions, indeed.
So before we leave, I just recently saw a announcement that maybe something that we want to briefly touch on is that Grand Theft Auto 6 just moved up its release date.
I saw that this morning.
Yeah. I want to touch upon that kind of quick here before we round out. With everything that has kind of gone into this game specifically, like, the expectations are very high, to say the least. I want to kind of put this out there, and this is my take on it. The success Grand Theft Auto 6 has is going to determine the future of where the industry goes from here. And I will put my foot down on that statement specifically, because a lot of things with this game are very specific that a lot of people are raising eyebrows, or maybe they're kind of looking at it like, really, is this what we're going to be doing moving forward? It all comes down to how many people are going to buy this game when it comes out, and probably over the time for the next, probably a couple months after that. Because there's already talk that this is going to be like a $100 game out of the gate. And I am worried of that statement in particular, kind of going back to what we were talking about, of gaming's getting more or less expensive. If this is how it's going to be, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to severely determine the future of how much games will be costing moving forward. Like, the Switch 2 was already kind of raising some eyebrows with some of their pricing that they were putting in. But this is going to be an even bigger eyebrow raiser, depending on how many people actually bite the initial bullet on this one and buy it for the supposed $100 price tag. I don't know if it's going to stay that way. I don't know if that's going to be the plan. But I do think that this game is going to determine the future of the industry as we know it. And that is saying a lot, given like there's already some things kind of going on right now that we've briefly talked about over the course of the last few weeks even. We're going to see a very weird change in the industry, I think, when it comes to how much things cost and buy and all that sort of stuff. And I think this is going to be the final nail in that coffin of where it's going to go moving forward, like, realistically.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of these quote-unquote must-have titles.
Yeah.
That are going to be a major player.
I think the way you phrase it too is it's going to even change the description of the must-have. Like, we talk about, finding ways to kind of be not cheap, but frugal with how you can
Yep.
play games. I would not be surprised if their asking price on this is so high that it actually turns people away from actually going after that. And I will be frank, I would rather see a company take a hit because they took a chance on a really dumb idea than to feel guilted that I didn't pay that $100 price tag or whatever it might be. So that they can learn we're not going to pay $30 more than we're used to. I think if it was a $70 game, this would not be as big of an issue. I think this would have been probably the more expected way of things to go. But the jump from what we did from last generation to the current generation, like just off of what we've seen with the Switch 2 prices, is going to be similar moving forward with the Xbox and PlayStation and all that stuff. I think we'll see a death of physical content in the near future, even if it's only temporary, because they are going to have to find ways to cut costs. And the first thing they're going to do is to no longer provide physical games for people, I feel like, if this does happen, because they've got to make that up. And it's like, I'm not paying $100 for a digital code. I will be very upfront about that.
No.
You shouldn't pay $100.
Not gonna do it.
No. If I'm paying $100 for a game, I expect to have something in my hands that I can feasibly look at it from. Like, I bought Persona 5 Royal, like the Steelbook edition with all the extra bells and whistle stuff when it came out, and it was $90. Like, I got more out of that than if I pay $100 for a digital code for a game. And like,
yep.
I hope that consumers are going to be smart enough to look at this and say, we are not going to let them decide what the prices are because they want to line their wallets. We get to decide how much we want to pay, and you will be respecting that. Like, our money is our money, and we need to be able to spend it how we see fit. So for them to decide, oh, we're going to upcharge you $30, $40 for a game that, is probably going to be the same level of content as some other games that we had sold previously. It's just going to have more bells and whistles and blah, blah, blah. I hope consumers are smart enough to see past the fog on that one and realize what that is giving them. It's giving them higher profit margins, because it will not stop at $100 if you play ball with them and accept that, yeah, $100 is a fair price. I would expect digital content to be skyrocketing in those courses at that point.
I think if the game's going to be $100, it's basically got to be you're getting the game, and then whatever was going to be the DLC or the season pass is just straight up bundled in, Because, when I think about a game like Smash Brothers, in practice, if you bought the game at full price and you bought both DLC passes, you would have paid like $100-some, because I think the second one was $30 and the first one was $25. So it's like you would have paid like $115 for that game, but and that's just the characters and the stages, right? That doesn't include any like the Mii costumes and all that extra stuff. But if that's going to be like the upfront price, just at that point, either say like it's all there, or like you're just gonna get it. It's all gonna be free. We're still working on it, but like we have enough here that it's like a complete game, but we're promising you all that. That would still suck, and we'd still need to figure out like that could be a whole nother topic of like, how do we make sure the updates and DLC can continue to be a thing past like servers and stuff going down? But it's like, you can't just ask for an upfront price for this and have a very similar experience to the previous thing that was $40-some less.
And I think something that needs to be addressed with a lot of this stuff is, I think what they should do, and kind of going into the Smash Brothers example you just provided, they should finish what that supposed stuff is. Like, I don't want to see more of this, like, season pass bullcrap. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, we have the season pass, and we'll have 6 new characters, and it's like, okay, but they're going to get staggered releases. I'm like, just release them all together. Like, I can wait. I do not need to sit here and be, like, playing Omni-Man on day 1 of the season pass because Mortal Kombat said that this is releasing today. And I understand like certain things like do need time to like cook in the oven if you haven't developed them fully, or if like they're not fully finished. But be honest, be upfront about it. Like, you know, kind of going with the Smash Brothers example, like you had said, like Sakurai was very upfront about like they didn't have certain characters fully developed when the season passes were getting announced. They knew who they wanted, but they didn't necessarily have it ready. I understand that, and I accept that as like, okay, I'll buy it when you're all finished with it, and then I will appreciate that when it's, you know, fully out. And like buying a season pass out of the get-go before everything is all done feels like such a weird business model to me. Like, I'm getting kind of way too on topic on this, and like I feel like this definitely will be a topic that I'm going to be much more serious on down the road. But I'll finish it with this point: is our money is our money. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm anti-capitalist. I'm just anti-greed. And I feel like that is where a lot of the industry is kind of leading into more or less, is they want to have ways to take our money without us realizing, I think, how much we're actually spending it. It's the same kind of idea like a lot of people like to put out is like, if you stop spending, you know, $5 for this one coffee a day and put it in like a jar or something, how much did you actually save? It's like, I feel like it's kind of that same vein where it's like if I spend $5 for a character skin just because I thought it looked cool, like how much is that actually going to get me? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think Smash Brothers is like the one example of something that can get away with something like that because
they're up front.
They're up front, and if there's any dev who like is pretty good to his word, it's Sakurai, but like there's so many that just aren't. That it's just, it doesn't make sense to do that. But no, I mean, you're absolutely right. We could tangent on this forever, but I think we've said most of what we needed to say with this.
Yeah, that can be a whole other topic later down the road, but I think for now,
I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, I think for now we should end the episode before I get real heated on this one. I just really wanted to bring up the whole, like,
yes,
holy crap,
chill.
Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming next month. Or this month, I should say, actually.
Well, no, it's coming a year from this month.
Oh, is it this? Oh, I must have misread it. I thought it said 2025.
The 26th of May, 2026.
Okay, point still
sad. Yes. Either way, we're finishing this off. If you have any comments to write down, write them down. We'd love to see them. It doesn't mean they'll always get read, but you know, you're certainly welcome to put them down. If you want to do something else like that, you know, you could send us a voice message. I would love to have a voice message at speakpipe.com/endless conversation loop, also linked in the description of this episode. But yeah, that's everything we got to say. So I am Brandon.
And I'm Boom.
And this has been a very productive conversation, I would say. So thank you for listening in, everyone.
Yeah.